Good morning and welcome. Today is the second in my series about March 2020 being all about renewal for new moms. So, welcome. I'm very glad to have you, as is the case with my other Facebook Live broadcasts. I come in quiet. I'm assuming that my audience is new moms and they do have a tiny baby nearby who might be sleeping or one that you wish would sleep. So I'm thrilled that you're here, but I keep the volume down when I welcome you. So, um, so this theme of renewal for new mothers really arose from some work that I did back in February, and my belief that we get an unprecedented opportunity as new moms over the age of 40. Motherhood is your jumping off point to a complete reinvention. And I really believe this. I believe it deeply. That was the case for me. One of the parts of my life where I enjoyed the most reinvention and renewal was in my relationships. This is my relationship with myself, my relationships with other people, you name it. I also think that relationships are a point of stress for not a lot of new mothers. Um, so I want to address some of this with you today. So first, let's take a moment and talk about what is a relationship really. Your relationship with another person is your thoughts about that person. That's not what we're taught. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this here for a moment by way of introduction. Um, your relationship with another person is your thoughts about that person. From your thoughts about that person, you have feelings about them and you take actions in your life based on those thoughts and feelings, and then the relationship produces a certain result, right? Like it's a relationship that makes you have thoughts and feelings and actions that are really positive and happy, or it goes the other direction, like it doesn't work out and your results from the relationship are um, a source of unpleasantness in your life. So this take on a relationship might sound strange to you if you've never been exposed to the idea before that our relationships are all our thoughts about another person. So if you've had similar teachings, then you're with me. But if not, hang with me here for a minute and I'll get a little bit deeper into it. So we are socialized to think that other people make us feel things. Uh, So I grant to you that unless you've worked with a coach before or been exposed to this is going to sound really strange at first. Um, you proceed through life thinking that other people cause your thoughts and feelings. And that's a normal thing for people to think in our society. Until I encountered coaching, that was totally what I thought my entire life. But it's not true that other people cause our thoughts and feelings. And I'm going to give you a very simple example to highlight this. Um, Imagine a person that you adore, someone that you just think is the best ever. You think they're amazing. Now imagine a third person, right? Completely different third person who does not adore the person that you adore. You have one set of thoughts about this person. The third person has a completely different set of thoughts. Um, the third person finds her to be annoying and unimaginable to you. You adore her, but the third person finds her to be annoying. She's the same person, right? We're talking about you and the third person having thoughts, your own thoughts about the same person. How is this possible? Right? It's quite something when you think about it. And in your life, there's probably dozens of examples, right? People you adore or that you find irritating, but like the person you find irritating has been married for 30 years. And, that person's spouse thinks they're amazing. You're right. Like there's just this entire spectrum of thoughts and feelings that exist in the world about every person you know. You with me? Your thoughts about the person are the relationship that you have with them. So the person is a neutral. You adore her, somebody else thinks she's annoying, but she is neutral. You from your standpoint of adoration, you want to be around her all the time because you have all these positive thoughts and feelings that drive your actions toward her. But the annoyed person avoids her as much as possible. So you see how the thought on your part, I adore her, plays out in your feelings and your actions. The thought of the third person, she's annoying, plays out in that person's feelings and actions. So the person is neutral. Then we have all of our thoughts about that person, which drives our feelings, and then our actions of either wanting to be around her all the time or avoiding her as much as possible. So if your mind is reeling a little bit about this, don't be concerned. It's a big concept to absorb. But I won't go any further down that rabbit hole for a moment, but I wanted you to have that as foundational background before we get into talking about the rest of the topic. So that's the most basic explanation. If you have questions, you can always submit them and I'll be happy to address them, down the road or later in the month. So moving from the basic premise that our relationships are really our thoughts about another person, I want to give you the good news. As a new mom, you have the ability to work on your own thoughts about all the relationships in your life. And new motherhood is an excellent time to do this work. Again, renewal, it's a good thing. It's beneficial to you. It can be beneficial to all the people in your life. So here we go. We spoke last week about motivation, that the arrival of your baby gives you excellent motivation to make changes in your life for the positive. And all the relationships in your life can be places where change might be really welcome. How's that for a thought? These relationships might even be places like we talked about last week, where things initially get a lot more stressful for you after the baby arrives. So, as I said at the beginning, I think relationships can be really stressful for new mothers, especially mothers who are over the age of 40. That was definitely the case for me, without a doubt. So before becoming a mom, I had a really strong self-identity that had been 40 years in the making. I had done a lot of work to turn into the woman that I was. I saw myself as a problem solver and a fixer. I saw myself as very competent professionally. I saw myself as a very stable person who other people relied upon for advice. I saw myself as a good friend and a loving wife and a dependable colleague. All of these things were really important to me. Then I had a baby and my identity completely shifted. It was one of the most unsettling parts of new motherhood when I really think back on it. I've spoken about this before, that it was like my world tilted on its axis when the baby arrived. All of a sudden, nothing and no one mattered as much as my new baby. which is totally normal, right? Nothing had gone wrong at all. In fact, it is biochemical and hormonal and completely hardwired into our bodies that the baby takes priority during that earliest phase of motherhood. When you think about it, right? For people, right, as we're evolving as humans who who didn't have that, right? Who didn't like tilt on axis. It's all about the baby. How's my baby? Is the baby hungry? What do I need to do to keep the baby healthy and safe? Those babies didn't have as good a chance of survival, right? Like our ancestors living in caves where, life was really dangerous and there was, you needed the basics, right? Food, shelter, and, warmth when it was cold and all those things, right? The child depends on for survival. Having a mother whose literal hardwiring in her body goes whoop, baby, and keys in on the baby and the baby's health and survival. Those are the babies that survived. So those are the gene pool that we evolved into. That same thing is happening for us in today, 2020. That hardwiring is present for us like baby. Everything shifts. I was not prepared for this at all. I've spoken about this in other sessions. I was totally unprepared for my world to go, "Whoa, baby." Caught me totally off guard. No one told me this was going to happen. Or if they told me it was going to happen, it didn't really sink in any meaningful way, right? Like, oh, that'll be nice. Like, no, it actually won't be nice. Baby, right? Like all the stuff I used to pay attention to all the time, baby. It just becomes all about the baby. There's nothing to be done, right? This is the human brain. It's totally fine. Now, my old self identity, meanwhile, was still present in my brain. And that old self identity of mine found this shift toward baby to be very alarming. I didn't know it was coming and I wasn't ready for it. My relationships and my friendships were a place where I went for reinforcement of my old self identity. So I drew a lot from my interactions with the world, again, in friendships, work colleagues, all those sources, all the people in my life, and all the thoughts I had about those people, and what I was doing internally as I interacted with them in the world. I think that the unexpected shift and then my sort of self identity was shifting and wasn't getting the old reinforcements that it used to get. That was totally the source of my being so unsettled when the baby came. So how did this really manifest in my life as a practical matter? I think in several ways. The first of which was that my relationships and friendships became something that my mind wanted to label as burdens or as distractions, right? Like in the new framework in my brain, right? My brain had gone, baby. So anything that took me away from the baby, my human brain wanted to make sense of those things by labeling them as something that's normal. That's what the human brain does, is it categorizes and labels things. So in that pivot, baby, everything that wasn't the baby was a burden and a distraction as in my brain that was trying to make sense of the world. Those people in my life didn't change at all, just like in my example from a few moments ago. They were the same people. But I was different and my brain was different and my thoughts about them were different. My priorities shifted, so my thoughts about the people in my life shifted. Do you see what I'm saying here? Like this is really important. The arrival of the baby, again, was a time where my internal motivations and priorities became completely different immediately and dramatically. Excuse me. But the rest of my world stayed the same. And I still had this old self identity bopping around in my head and kind of trying to drive the bus. That old self identity drew a lot of value from my stable relationships that had been with me before the baby arrived. All of this was deeply uncomfortable for me. Some of the emotions that came up for me during this time as I interacted with people in my life were resentment, frustration, victimization. I was like, I had thoughts that I was being victimized by all these people. And, again, everybody was just doing what they had been doing all along. My thoughts had shifted and shifted me into a really disempowered and victimized place. And that I was just sort of put upon. I just had this string of thoughts about how very put upon I was. And I acted in my relationships from those negative emotions. Totally did. I showed up really badly in a lot of cases. The relationship suffered and I suffered, right? Like as a participant in the relationship that was now struggling, the relationship was now struggling. I was suffering. I was also suffering because in my, gravitational shift to the baby, I had, the deep urge to be all about the baby. And then this part of my brain that was like, wait a minute, that's not how you act in the world. You're a friend and a colleague and all this other stuff, right? So this sort of tug of war going on inside my own head, deeply unsettling, a lot of suffering. I sort of had a lot of what I now realize was self-imposed suffering. And I didn't understand what was happening. The relationships on the outside looked exactly like they had before the baby came. So, how do you frame all this stuff in your mind, make sense of it, and go forward in a more positive direction? I had no idea. And again, I was completely unprepared. Nobody had told me this was going to happen, or if they had told it to me, they didn't say it in any kind of meaningful way that I could make use of. The good news for you is that I am here to tell you this is going to happen and it's okay. Nothing will have gone wrong, right? Like your brain will be like, this is all wrong. This is all wrong. I'm suffering and I'm uncomfortable. Nothing has gone wrong. If you're experiencing this right now, I am here to tell you this is normal. It's just your life going through a renewal as you go through motherhood. Working from the framework of knowing that you're going to change and having awareness that the change is coming and that it's possible for you to have different thoughts about your relationships and the people in your life. That awareness alone would have reduced my anxiety by a ton as I went through the early months of motherhood. Having some understanding and some grace for myself would have made so much of a difference. If you are going through this right now, that's my biggest suggestion, is just to have a lot of grace for yourself and then try to make sense of it from a place of, grace and understanding and compassion for yourself. I just thought that something had gone wrong and that I needed to fix it. I mentioned, I saw myself as a fixer. If something was wrong, it was my job to fix it. It was a disaster. The other really important thing here that I want to talk about is that during my pregnancy, I had a lot of mental chatter in my head about how my life would stay the same. I've been giving this time in my life a lot of thought on my own behalf and on behalf of my clients. Like, what exactly are my clients going through? How exactly can I best help them? One of the coping mechanisms that I think I used and that I think is normal, totally normal coping mechanism for a pregnant woman, is to have a mental story trying to predict what my life would look like after the baby came. This is very understandable. The human brain, as we've talked about in past lessons, hates change. So my mental chatter was all geared toward making my brain have a storyline running in my head all the time that nothing would change all that much, right? Like, yeah, I would have a baby, but that life would sort of look like it did now. That, as I sort of talk this through with you, that mental chatter is probably why, if anybody was telling me, oh, it's going to be normal for your relationships to change, that didn't permeate. Isn't that fascinating? Because I was like, no, no, I can tolerate the change of the baby arriving, but I can't tolerate more change than that. So interesting, people. So that was working against me, right? Like my internal dialogue that I would have a baby and that would be different, but that the rest of my life would sort of look like it did before the baby. That's not that's not actually helpful. Simultaneously, right? Again, this is a human brain phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon of my brain. It is a phenomenon of the human brain. All the people in my life and all of my relationships were having the exact same mental chatter. Like, oh, Heather's going to have a baby. And so she'll be a mom. So the baby will come. But everything else will kind of stay the same. So I'm telling myself that. The people in my life who I'm in a relationship with are telling themselves that. It's no wonder that this stuff caught us by surprise. So, those friends and family members who were accustomed to my pre baby self and my pre motherhood relationship habits and their mental chatter. And then we all walk with our mental chatter. We all walk into the future, and here my baby arrives. So, this is powerful stuff, right? This is the hardwiring of the human brain, and it is powerful. And it's present in our relationships, personal and professional. It's sets of unspoken expectations and behavior patterns that our brains use to make us feel safe and to make us feel like we're part of the tribe and, we're not going to get left out on the savannah to be eaten by lions. There are actual neurotransmitters at work that are, you know, the neurotransmitters that cause us to be very uncomfortable when we think we're going to be left on the savannah to be eaten by lions. It's the same biochemistry at work. So, um, so that biochemistry, neural chemistry, don't get eaten by a lion, is what is being disrupted by the arrival of your baby. And disruptions here are really, really unsettling. And, the more I think about this, there's a tremendous narrative around new motherhood about all the things that we lose. Like, I became a mom and I lost all this stuff. And one of the things that gets a lot of attention is that I lost friendships. I lost friendships when I became a new mom. That I lost all my friends. They lost, or like, you know, over the years, right? I didn't become a mom until after I was age 40. Seeing my friends from earlier decades become mothers And then the friendship changed. And so I had a narrative that when people have babies, I lose friends. It's loss on both sides. It's loss that the mother has an expectation of and that the friend has an expectation of. I think this is a big deal. I think that narrative of all the things that mothers lose is one of the nastiest and most destructive narratives about motherhood. And I think this is where it comes from, is that this relationship uh, shift and renewal of relationships that comes with motherhood totally normally is something that our brains interpret as a problem. This is why your gravitational force shifts toward the baby. And what your brain wants you to do is find things that are helpful to that gravitational shift. And a lot of times, yeah, that does mean new friends. Maybe that does mean that some of your relationships from prior to the baby just don't work anymore. Your thoughts about that person change enough with the baby's arrival that you decide that the relationship isn't, for you anymore. It's all our thoughts, right? It's all our thoughts. The shift happens, your thoughts change, and then you go about making changes to the relationship. Um, and the early months of motherhood were nothing but disruptions to my relationships. And so, as we focus on renewal here during the month of March, I have the same approach this week that I had about motivation last week. I think the discomfort in relationships when it emerges, not if, when it emerges, is a sign that a relationship can adjust for the positive. If there is friction that emerges after the baby in a relationship, you can take a look at what's happening and probably gain some awareness that the issue in the relationship existed prior to the baby, but that the arrival of the baby caused the issue to surface. We covered this last week. You've got this, set of habits and patterns that exist, in your 20s and 30s, just like you have relationships that have probably existed since your 20s and 30s. You're having a new baby after age 40 and everything starts to change, and things that emerge as problems have been there for a long time. You've just been sweeping them under the rug, or in my example from last week, you've had them closed up in a closet with the door shut. So the arrival of the baby causes the closet to spill open and all of the issues in the relationship come falling out. It's the same phenomenon. It really is. But again, the timing of the baby and then the problem in the relationship is makes us have the first instinct be to blame the baby. This is why we phrase it as a loss. Like, I had a baby and I lost all my friends. Or, oh, she had a baby, so now she doesn't hang out with us anymore. There was probably a problem in that friendship prior to the baby's arrival. I mean, nobody's fault, right? Like, it's not the baby's fault. It's just how a friendship was operating. And then the arrival of the baby and one person becoming a mom is a time for a potential renewal if people are paying attention, right? If you're paying attention and you have some awareness about this, and you can recognize the discomfort for what it is, which is a sign that something needs some work and some love and some attention. If you're not looking for it, it just looks like problems. It just looks like the relationship went south, the baby showed up, and then the friendship fell apart and everything's terrible. And then, because we don't have any framework for dealing with it unless we've, sort of paid attention to this stuff and learned some of these tools. Um, so the points of friction that can be exposed after the baby arrives that are due to some underlying problem that may have been in the relationship for the beginning. This can be anything, right? Like codependence, an imbalance of some kind in the friendship, emotionally unhealthy situations. Those can all be at play. And again, this is professional or personal. It doesn't matter what part of your life we're talking about. So in my case, there were situations where I was using a relationship to reinforce my old self-identity, right, as the fixer and the problem solver. And those relationships had just become something that was like scaffolding for my self-identity, right? I was really in some situations that I hadn't examined in a long, long time that were not the best for me, and not the best for the other people either. Um, and I didn't know this until motherhood arrived. I did not know to go looking for ways to improve the relationship. Under that old self-identity for me, pre-motherhood, everything was fine. And then the arrival of the baby and me changing made things be temporarily not fine and took work on my part, very intentional work to get them back where, we're back to some version of fine. And it's possible. I just, if you are a new mom and you're struggling with some of this stuff, this work is possible and it's really work worth doing. It's very rewarding, I think, because then you get to go forward with relationships in your life that are kind of healthier and where everybody gets a lot more kind of breathing room. And it only takes one person to do this work because our relationships are in our thoughts. You, by working on your thoughts, get to transform the relationship without the other person doing anything, right? It's totally possible. It's very empowering. This is very empowering work. It's very freeing. The other thing that's fascinating in the other relationship that can really come up is your relationship with your own mother. This was the case for me big time. And when I had my baby, my mother was dead. She'd been dead for like 6 or 8 years when I became a mom. But the act of becoming a mother just brought to the surface all of my unresolved issues with my own mother. Suddenly I was mothering and I had a lot of thoughts about mothering and feelings about mothering. And so my brain, when it thought about, me being a mother, what did it do? It coughed up all the stuff from my own childhood and memories about my mother and thoughts about my mother. So, um, I think relationships with our parents or caregivers from childhood can also become a big point of stress. But again, the good news is that you start to do this work on yourself and work in your relationships, and you can have a renewal of your relationships with your own parents. And of course, the biggest one for most people is your relationship with your partner or spouse. In my case, my husband. Um, and then, if you've got a partner or spouse that you live with, then you're both parenting, right? So then both of you are going through this sort of life pivot and, coping with that each, together and in your own separate ways. And, what does that look like? And how is that? What are your thoughts and feelings about how that's going? And what are your thoughts and feelings about how your spouse or partner is doing or should be doing or, should not be doing? And how is that affecting your relationship, right? Like, sort of, I became a parent and my marriage went down the tubes is also a big narrative of loss. Or I became a parent and now I'm not going to be able to find a partner because suddenly I'm a mom. And so you also get lots and lots of opportunities to work on some of those topics during this earliest phase of motherhood and have a renewal about how you see yourself as a spouse, a partner, a wife, whatever the case may be. What identity do you have for yourself around that? What do you want it to be? Um, it is the opportunity that motherhood presents to us. Not prevents. Motherhood doesn't prevent anything. Motherhood presents us with the opportunity. That was my whole point from February. Presents us with the opportunity to completely renew ourselves. Our relationships with other people are really, really important. The more we sort of dig into this, science digs into this and shows us the importance of connections between people, connections with our families, our friends, our communities. Relationships are really important. We've got this, thoughts like it takes a village. So if that's one of your thoughts about motherhood, oh, it takes a village, and you look around and you don't have a village, that can be a huge point of stress. Or you look around and you think, oh, my village, I became a mom and now my village is abandoning me. Or my village is a burden to me that I can no longer tolerate. All these all these thoughts are possible. They are all thoughts that I can confess to and that I hear from people and that I think my clients struggle with. So the other relationship, this is all the sort of the external relationships, right? Friends, family, colleagues, spouse or partner, the relationships with other people. The most important relationship that you get to renew when you become a mother is your relationship with yourself. This is a big one. And when I look back on all the work I've done and how my life has transformed since I became a mom at age 41, it is this relationship with myself that is the biggest one. And I've got good news for you. You can renew your relationship with yourself completely. You can use the opportunity that new motherhood gives you to have a completely new relationship with yourself. In my case, I went from a relationship that was really based on a lot of self-loathing, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of very negative mental chatter to the one I have now, which is a relationship with myself that's based on a lot of self-love and a lot of grace and a lot of support that I'm able to give myself using the toolkits that I've gotten from coaching. So that is the place where I can just make a huge difference for my clients. When you've got your relationship with yourself in a place that is more loving and more nurturing, all your relationships with the outside world and the people in your life get so much easier. And of course, as a new mom, you've got a brand new relationship with your baby. I mean, your baby can't talk, right? I work with women uh, who are either pregnant or they have a baby who is under 18 months old. So your baby can't talk. Your baby can't do a whole lot during most of that time, right? Your baby's eating and sleeping and dirtying diapers. But what is your relationship with your baby? What are your expectations of your baby? It's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating work. Your thoughts and feelings about your baby are having a big impact on how you're showing up as a mother, even if you're not aware of them, even if they're all sort of thoughts that are unconscious or subconscious. Bringing all that stuff out and taking a look at it can be so helpful. Again, it's all our thoughts, your relationships with the outside world, yourself, and your baby are all your thoughts. The other fascinating phenomenon for my clients, right, who are new moms, who are the family breadwinner, who are over age 40, suddenly you get a new set of most important people in your life, and those are your baby's caregivers, whether that's a nanny or the staff at the daycare or whoever in your life becomes the caregiver for your baby while you're at work. Because in my client's case, they're going back to work, some of them almost immediately after the baby comes. So you have this group of people who, usually it's more than one person, but that group of people becomes some of the most important people in your life. All of a sudden, it's like you they become the people who you hang on their every word, right? Like the women who were at the daycare where we started when my son was 4 months old is when he entered daycare. And I couldn't wait to talk to her at the end of the day, like the woman who was the head um in the nursery at the daycare where he went. I was like, oh, tell me everything that happened. She suddenly became the most important person I talked to on a day-to-day basis. Brand new, right? That's a brand new relationship. And how did I interact with her? And how did I show up with her? And what were my expectations? And what were her expectations? It was a brand new thing for me. And as a brand new mom, I had a lot of anxiety about it. So I have no doubt that I showed up most of the time when I dealt with her as an anxious hot mess. The good news was she was a professional with a ton of experience. So I was not the first anxious hot mess. Um, but anyway, I mean, it was fascinating. It's fascinating to think about. I really enjoy working with my clients on this part of their life transformation into becoming a mother because it can make so much difference. I used the word suffering a while ago, and I use that word on purpose because it's, like, oh, well, this is just how it is. It's just how it is. Like I have a baby and I lose all my friends, or I have a baby and I, whatever, whatever negative thing happens, those thoughts were causing me to suffer. And I now recognize that that suffering was optional. And when I start to work with my clients, their suffering is optional. And if you are currently suffering from any of these kinds of thoughts or situations in your life, suffering is optional and coaching can make a huge difference for you. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you about this. I think this topic is really important. And if you are a person who's a new mom over the age of 40 and some of these issues are challenging for you, I really encourage you to reach out. It would be my privilege and my honor to be able to help you through some of these most challenging aspects of adjusting to motherhood. But nothing has gone wrong. Take my word for it. It's normal. It's normal and you're fine. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.